record, and let's finish chapter 8. The last thing that we looked at was, I believe, the different political party alignments. Which usually occurred every 34 to 35 years. This is a similar slide about the history of kind of the dominant parties during 60-year periods, except for one shorter period, which is parallel to that same error that's mentioned in the book. The Democrats dominated, and this is basically a combination of the Democratic Republicans that Jefferson founded, and he was the first president in 1800 when he became president. He was the first president during this domination period. Then when Jackson became president in 1824, the party shifted more to a Democratic focus instead of Democratic-Republican balance. But that whole party system dominated for 60 years. The 1860 election was Lincoln's victory and the rise of the Republican Party, which they dominated pretty much for 70 years until the Great Depression. That was a 36-year period of Democrat-Republicans again, the return of the Democrats. If we wanted to use Star Wars lingo, we could say this Republican domination was a new hope. Then return of the Democrats. Or actually, the Empire Strikes Back, I guess. I'm just using return since Return of the Jedi, which we could say would be here in 1868 with the return of the Republicans. But instead of Republicans dominating since 1868, it's been a back and forth divided. In 1868, Nixon becomes president, and then again in 72, and he's got to leave before he gets impeached, and so he resigns during the Watergate scandal. His vice president finishes and pardons Nixon, that's Gerald Ford, and he finishes out the term to 76. Then Jimmy Carter, a Democrat, becomes president until 80. Then there's a long string of Republican, a 12-year stretch of Reagan and Bush Sr. till 92. 92 to 2000 is Clinton. 2000 to 2008 is little George Bush. 2008 to 2016 is Barack Obama. And now we have Trump. And so we have these periods of Democrats being president and then Republicans, usually for an 8 to 12-year period. So a divided government. The reason I bring this up, the party history will not be on the test, but the party realignments that are in the textbook will, as we mentioned last week right here, pages 220 through 224. But the reason I bring this up is because of the Democratic Republican Party started out as a party basically for the people. Remember, Jefferson wanted a good balance of federalism, but also being in touch with the farmers and rural people. Jackson took it even one step further, wanting it to be a populist president who connects the presidency with the people. But towards the end of this period, the Southern culture kind of comes to the forefront of the Democratic Party, and they are for state rights and especially to protect the institution of slavery. The Republican Party comes upon the scene and ends slavery. There is a balance or a focus of the Republican Party that the federal government has more influence. The northern states had come together to fight the southern states. And after the Civil War with Reconstruction, the southern states have to basically, they will only be they will only be received back into the Union if they follow the Republican plan. And so state rights, states are still an autonomous government. We still have the federal system where we have a federal body politic and we have state governments. But during this time, the federal government gained in influence. But then with the Great Depression and Hoover's failure to, Hoover was a Republican president who did not want the federal government to interfere in the free market. And so when the Great Depression hit, Hoover wanted to leave the responsibility of taking care of people during the Depression to the state governments instead of the federal government. And so the stock market crash hit in October of 1929. The Great Depression was then inaugurated, basically. Then you had the Dust Bowl. And so in 1932, Franklin Roosevelt comes on the scene, and he's going to run on a platform of the government helping out with the people, and he gets elected in. Hoover gets swept out, and FDR begins a long string of government programs, federal government programs, to help the nation. And we could say probably this is the birth of big government during the New Deal era with FDR. Big government really rises to the forefront, and they come up with programs to help the poor, the homeless, Social Security is passed, and it becomes a program that is still around today and basically is like a golden calf, sacred cow that you don't mess with. During this time, Republicans, as we head to 1968, it started in the early 60s with Barry Goldwater, a very radical Republican presidential candidate in '64 who was defeated by Lyndon Johnson. But he even talked about revoking Social Security, and that was a no-no. But in 1968, Nixon comes in, and except for Jimmy Carter in 76, the rise of a strong Republican Party that is against big government really comes into focus in 1980 with Ronald Reagan. Reagan's, one of his famous quotes was that big government is the problem. And so what we've seen is a kind of a reversal in foundational beliefs. Now the Republican Party is more for state rights and small federal government, whereas the Democratic Republican Party, which then turned into the Democratic Party, started out as smaller federal government, more connection with the people. All right, let's jump into the two parties for just a little bit, and then we'll look at the history of third parties in our nation. But again, this will not be on the test, but this one from your textbook will be. Yellow highlight, know them. Little reminder there. So the makeup of Republicans and Democrats today, actually 9 years ago, but probably still pretty close today. More men, these are eligible voters. Republicans have more men than women. Democrats have more women than men. Caucasians, %87 of Republicans are Caucasians. Only 12, and now this is their, this is going to be your, yeah, and then non-white, which includes Hispanic, but also African American, Asian, 12%. I'm not sure what the other 1% would be. Democrats, 63% Caucasian, 36% non-white. Republicans are more conservative. Democrats, your ultra right conservatives would say moderates are basically the same as liberals. But if we put liberals and moderates together, you have 79, about 80% of Democrats. We would say they are just to the left of the middle, all the way to the extreme left. The importance of religion, 73% of Republicans say that, about 60% of Democrats. The majority of the religious in the Republican Party are Protestants, 62%. %48 of the religious makeup of Democrats are Protestants. You can see both parties are made up of about the same amount of Catholics and others. And then Democrats have about twice as much people who claim no religion at all. Then Republicans have more married couples than do Democrats. Here's some more things about the demographics of Republicans and Democrats. The average Republican is 50 years old, while the average Democrat is 47. Only 1 out of 4 Jewish voters will support Republicans. Were you born after 1980? Only 36% of millennials say they support the Republican Party, but 55% say they support Democrats. But since 2008, with the election of Obama, the millennial demographic has decreased by 13 points when it comes to the Democrats having an advantage with the millennials. That's interesting. I would say probably some of your older millennials that are turning 40 this year, they're becoming more conservative, like their parents. Their children are getting older, and they're getting closer to sending kids to college and retirement, and so those things are important. All right, so we're going to jump into the history of third parties. Are there any questions? All right, I showed you a ballot. I showed you the new ballot the other day. Here's a ballot from the 2016 election, and I'm going to make it a little bigger. And once again, you can see if you just wanted to vote all Republicans, instead of going through all this, you could just fill in Republican or either of these two parties. There were 3 candidates on the Oklahoma ballot in 2016. Republican, Trump and Pence. Hillary and Tim Kaine on the Democratic Party. And then the Libertarian Party had a guy named Gary Johnson and his vice presidential candidate, Billy Weld. This is the top part of that ballot showing the straight party voting. Other elections that took place, we had an election for one of our senators. And you can see that Lankford was the Republican. He was the incumbent, which means he was already in office. He was running again. There was 1 Democrat who ran against him. There was 1 Libertarian, and then there was 2 independents. So if you wanted this guy, Robert Murphy, to be our senator, you could have just voted straight Libertarian. If you wanted Johnson and Weld to be president. If you wanted these guys to be president and vice president, but you wanted to keep Lankford in the state, then you'd have to vote Libertarian here and Republican here. And I read to you the other day that there are 6 candidates on this year's presidential ticket in Oklahoma. Again, Kanye West is not on every state ballot because he didn't declare in time. All right, let's talk about the history of third parties in our nation. The 2-party system is not in the Constitution, as we know. Our founding fathers, many of them, wanted to avoid parties. So it's not set in stone that only Republicans and Democrats can run. But we are, of all the democracies, I believe this is mentioned in your textbook, of all the democracies today, we are the most rigid when it comes to having two main parties. The other democracies are pretty much wide open to several parties. There's not a dominance of just two major parties. So here's some of the parties over the 240 plus years of America. The textbook mentions that there have been over 1,000 third political parties in our nation. You will still hear about the Green Party and the Libertarian Party today. You might hear about the Socialist Party on more of a state level, but you don't hear it much on a national level. Some past political parties that are third parties are man, myth, and legend. Teddy Roosevelt was president for 8 years as a Republican. He then resigned after 2 terms and went hunting for a year in Africa. He came back, and his replacement, who he had handpicked, was doing terrible with the nation, according to Roosevelt. So Roosevelt ran again in 1912, but the Republicans didn't pick him, so he started the National Progressive Party, sometimes called the Bull Moose Party, because he said he was as strong as a bull moose when he was asked if he felt healthy enough to run for president again. So Teddy's slogan was a square deal all around. Everybody's going to get the square deal. Now this moose, sometimes to me it looks like it's got a rooster's comb on his head too. But anyway, the Bull Moose Party. Now, before you all were alive, the very first election that I was eligible to vote in, because I was born in 71, I turned 18 in 89, so I couldn't vote in 88, but I could vote in 92. You had George Bush running against, man, who was that? Anyway, there was a third party guy in 92 named Ross Perot, a Texas billionaire running on the, I think, Progressive Party. No, Reform Party, sorry. Reform Party. And, oh, duh, it was Bush versus Clinton, sorry. George Bush Sr. had already been president from 88 to 92. And he ran again in 92, but Bill Clinton ran against him. And Ross Perot ran and kind of split the vote, and Bill Clinton became president in 92. But Ross Perot, he was kind of like comic relief. He was this short little guy with this funny little voice. Dana Carvey, a former Saturday Night Live actor and impressionist, does a great Ross Perot. The Libertarian Party formed when I was born. This is Johnson and Weld, who ran 4 years ago as president. Now I want to show you one of the most famous third-party winners. This man did not win the presidency. He won the governorship of Minnesota in 1998. He ran on the Reform Party, the same party as Ross Perot. He was from Minnesota. He had been an actor. And even before that, he had been a professional wrestler. His name is Jesse Ventura, but when he was a wrestler, he went by the name of Jesse the Body Ventura. Minnesota Governor-elect Jesse the Body Ventura. This is November of '98. He was on Time magazine. Body slam. That really was kind of a surprising thing. I remember that. But Jesse the Body shows that the American dream, or I should say, the opportunity for any American to be in government is a reality. Here he is when he was a wrestler. He wore very flamboyant colors and clothes. He eventually became an announcer. But then, as you can see, is happening today with The Rock and Batista and John Cena, wrestlers are moving into the realm of acting. So here he is in a Schwarzenegger movie called Predator. There he is right there. There's Arnold. That's Carl Weathers, who played Apollo Creed in the movie Rocky. Now, in the movie, now this is just bonus cultural stuff. You guys know that. But in the movie, he's got a famous line, which I want to show you, which I think you'll enjoy. They're in the jungle and they're being fired at, and Jesse says, "These guys are dug in like a tick from Alabama." And then listen to what his partner says and then what he says.
Dug in like an Alabama chick. You're hit. You're bleeding, man. I ain't got time to bleed. Son of a bitch.
I ain't got time to bleed. That was his famous line. And so he wrote an autobiography, and guess what it was titled? I Ain't Got Time to Bleed. Jesse Ventura. He was then in another Schwarzenegger movie called The Running Man, where he was a gladiator named Captain Freedom. And if you guys like action, gory movies from the 80s, this is for you. This was a movie based on a book actually written by Stephen King, but it wasn't the traditional Stephen King book like the book and movie It. So he used another name called Richard Bachman to write books like this that were a little different. Anyway, Jesse the Body becomes governor, and he shows that any American can become a candidate and even win an election. Some people don't think we'll ever see a third party candidate ever win the president election again, but it's possible. Now I want to show you one of my favorite third party candidates. I don't know if he ran this year, but he ran 4 years ago. He's a guy named Vermin Supreme. Yes, Vermin. He wears a rubber boot on his head. He's from New Hampshire. And
I know
yes,
exactly who you're talking about.
yes. He said that some of the things he's going to do is every American will get a pony, and he's going to defeat ISIS by time travel. He's going to go back in time. Obviously, he did not make it to the national debates, but he did campaign in New Hampshire. Let him run your life because he knows what's best for you. President of the USA, Overlord of Planet Earth 2016. Let's help take back America into the future. So he's using Back to the Future terminology because he's going to defeat ISIS by going back to the future. Everybody gets a pony, and together we will ride our ponies into a zombie-powered future. Somehow he's going to harness the power and energy of zombies to help with our energy crisis. Anyway, I don't know if he ran again. You guys might just do a Google search of Vermin Supreme 2020 and you can tell me. So that's the history of third parties and some of the more colorful candidates. Once again, the only time a third party won the presidency, and the reason I'm saying this is because this could be a nice little bonus question or a fill in the blank. The only time a third party won the presidency was in 1860 with President Abraham Lincoln. So we'll wrap up chapter 8 on Monday morning and get into chapter 9. Any questions on the history of third parties? Okay, I'm going to bring up the module 2 and just remind you that your chapter 9 brief is due by Sunday, and you have to have at least 4 responses to your classmates by Tuesday. All right, we will have a great weekend and look forward to seeing you on Monday. I'll keep it on for a little bit if there's any questions.
I don't think we have any questions.
All right.
Have a good one.
You too. All right, everyone else from Vian and those of you from Howe and Arcoma, we'll see you, plan on seeing you Monday.